Silas stood at the edge of his weathered ranch, the sun bleeding into the horizon, painting the sky with strokes of orange and purple. The wind curled around him, whispering secrets of loneliness. He glanced toward the small barn where the girl worked, her fingers dancing with vibrant colors on a canvas, oblivious to the world around her. Ilara, with her clouded eyes, captured the essence of life on the ranch, a place both desolate and alive. Silas watched, heart heavy with unspoken words, as she rendered his silhouette with gentle strokes. Her laughter, though silent, echoed in the space between them, filling the emptiness of his heart. Each day, she painted his world anew, bringing warmth to his cold existence. The weight of his past pressed down, but in her presence he found a fragile flicker of hope. In a life marked by struggle, she offered a vision he hadn't dared to dream. The dull clop of hooves against the weathered earth echoed through the cramped auction yard, where twilight hung like a shroud over the gathering crowd. Ilara's heart raced, each thud matching the frantic beat in her chest. Her fingers curled tightly around the fraying fabric of her dress, a final remnant of comfort in the unfamiliar chaos. The sharp laughter of her aunt rang out through the crowd, the harshness of it carving a wound deeper than any knife. She clutched the small satchel containing her meager belongings, her thoughts a swirling tempest of confusion and dread. The weight of her brother's betrayal lingered like an acrid smell, each breath a reminder that family could be the most treacherous of bonds. As Ilara was pushed onto the stage, she blinked against the glaring light, her world narrowing to a blur of faces and shadows. She could feel their eyes assessing her, torn between pity and schadenfreude. Anxiety crawled beneath her skin, and for a moment she was back home. She could hear her brother's harsh voice, telling her to be strong, not to cry or show weakness. But in that moment, consumed by an overwhelming sensation of worthlessness, she felt like nothing more than a discarded object, devoid of value or dignity, being sold to the highest bidder. Silas stood at the edge of the crowd, a man carved from the land, weathered and rough around the edges. His deep-set eyes scanned the stage, searching for something, anything, that might offer a hint at a life beyond the inertia of his struggling ranch. He had come to this gathering out of a sense of duty rather than desire, his existence bound by the relentless cycles of sun and soil. Yet there was something about the girl under the harsh light, something that drew him in like the gravity of the full moon. It wasn't just her blindness, it was the way she seemed to inhabit a world separate yet connected, a soft flicker of resolve amidst the noise. When the bidding began, Silas felt an odd stirring within him, as if he were being called to step forward. He listened to the voices around him, a cacophony of greed and desperation. Each bid, each shout, felt like daggers in the air, the sound twisting his gut. The auctioneer's voice droned like an ominous bell tolling for something lost. Ilara stood in silence, her face impassive but her heart screaming, trapped in a cage of uncertainty. Silas noticed her stillness, the way she held her head high, and he wondered what thoughts danced in her mind. Did she dream of freedom, or had she resigned herself to the fate that fate had dealt her? With a sudden surge of will, Silas stepped forward, raising his hand to place a bid. The act felt like a rupture in time, a moment that stretched beyond mere seconds, as the eyes of the crowd turned from the girl to him. He could feel their judgment as they sized him up, this rugged man with calloused hands and an uneasy spirit. But in that moment he no longer cared. He saw something in her, a spark that seemed to flicker in defiance of the darkness enveloping them. It wasn't pity he felt for her, but an understanding, an unspoken kinship woven from the shared fabric of struggle. The sale concluded swiftly, with Silas becoming the reluctant owner of not just a girl, but an echo of his own unfulfilled dreams. As Ilara was led away from the stage, the weight of her new reality pressed down like the darkening sky, trailing behind her like a shadow. Silas felt a strange mix of triumph and foreboding wrap around him, a bittersweet acknowledgement that the girl would now be a part of his life, Yet he was painfully aware of the distance that lay between them. He had bought her physically, but emotionally, there was a chasm that neither of them knew how to bridge. Navigating the terrain of their new relationship proved a labyrinthine challenge. In the days that followed, Silas watched Ilara from a distance, observing her as she began to explore her surroundings. Although she moved with cautious confidence, there was a lingering veil of sorrow, a silent testament to the scars her past had left. She painted with bare fingers on wooden boards, colors erupting in chaotic bursts that spoke louder than words ever could. Yet even in her artistry, Silas felt the distance. He could not penetrate the fortress she built around herself, and she remained a specter in his life. Silas could feel the weight of his own solitude weighing heavily on him, a solitary rancher wrestling with unfulfilled desires. In his heart, he wished to reach out, to draw Ilara closer, to share the simple joys of life on the land. But the memories of her aunt's cruel laughter haunted his thoughts, and he felt a surge of guilt at the notion of claiming her, even in small ways. Sometimes, he would catch glimpses of her painting, her brushstrokes as wild as her spirit, and he would wonder if she saw him, the man who rescued her, or the man she was still trying to escape. The sun dipped below the horizon one evening, casting the ranch in hues of gold and violet, and Silas stood hesitantly at the edge of the barn, the air thick with unspoken words. He wanted so desperately to breach the wall of silence that had grown between them like a chasm. Yet the fear of disrupting her fragile peace kept him rooted to the spot. Ilara, lost in her world of color and form, was a reminder of hopes unfulfilled, and each stroke of her brush felt like a plea for connection that he could not yet give. In that moment, the emotional distance stood as a silent testament to both of their pasts, an unshakable bridge that time alone could not mend. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a pale gold hue over the vast expanse of the ranch. Dust swirled lazily in the warm breeze as Ilara stepped down from the creaky wooden wagon, her heart racing with uncertainty. The air was thick with the scent of hay and earth, yet it felt foreign to her. Her fingers brushed against the rough, sun-bleached fence as she took her first steps into the new world that awaited her. Silas stood a few paces away, his silhouette framed against the setting sun, a reluctant guardian of the life she had just entered. Silas shifted his weight, the tension in his shoulders exposing the weariness of a man who had faced too many hardships alone. As he watched Ilara take in the surroundings, he felt an unfamiliar pang of guilt. He had known despair too intimately and feared the same might cloud Ilara's heart. Clouds moved in the distance, casting shadows across the land that mirrored the uncertainty in his mind. Silas turned his gaze away, his thoughts heavy with the weight of responsibility that now fell on his broad shoulders. Ilara adjusted the scarf tied around her neck, the gentle fabric brushing against her skin. She listened closely, attuned to the sounds that surrounded her, the distant call of a hawk, the rustle of leaves dancing with the wind. As she began to walk, feeling her way with slow, deliberate steps, she sensed the unevenness of the ground beneath her boots. Each careful movement heightened her awareness of the world around her, a world in which she would sharpen her instincts to navigate her path. Silas kept a respectful distance, stealing glances at her as she explored the ranch. He couldn't help but admire her quiet courage, but he also wrestled with his own emotions, how to treat her as family without overwhelming her with expectations he wasn't sure she could meet. A soft sound reached his ears. She was humming a tune, a melody he couldn't place, yet it pulled at his heartstrings. He felt an odd sense of connection, like she was somehow announcing her arrival, a reminder that she was here and would carve her own place into this weary life. Days turned into weeks, filled with unspoken moments and shared silences. Ilara busied herself measuring her world, her fingers brushing against the coarse surface of the barn's wooden beams, memorizing the shapes and creaks that accompanied her every movement. Silas watched her from afar, grappling with his growing protective instinct. He often worked the fields alone, lost in the rhythm of ploughing and planting, wrestling with the burdens that lay heavy on his chest. Still, something about Ilara's presence softened the sharp edges of his solitude. One afternoon, while Silas repaired a fence, he caught sight of Ilara seated beneath the sprawling oak tree, her head inclined slightly to the side. She was lost in her craft, or so it seemed. The rustling of leaves accompanied the faint scratch of pencil against paper. Silas's heart raced as he approached, careful not to interrupt the unspoken magic that hung in the air. He could see the concentration etched on her face, the way her brow furrowed in determination. In that moment, he wondered if she was drawing the ranch or perhaps crafting a world of her own. When Ilara finally looked up, her cheeks flushed with excitement, there was a spark in her eyes that ignited something deep within Silas. "Would you like to see?" she asked, her voice hopeful and softly melodic. Silas leaned closer and she extended a hand, guiding him to the rough paper now decorated with strokes of charcoal. The outlines of the barn and distant mountains emerged from the page, ready to breathe life. He blinked in awe, taken aback by how she captured the essence of the ranch without ever having seen it. I didn't know you could draw," he stammered, the unexpected beauty of her work wrapping around his heart like a warm embrace. Ilara's smile widened, revealing a glimpse of the joy that came from expressing herself. She relished sharing her newfound passion, the feeling of connection swirling around them, creating a fragile bond. Silas leaned closer, lost in the stories her art told, stories of a new beginning, of a home carved from uncertainty. Yet, as Ilara spoke about her vision for the ranch, Silas felt the familiar onset of doubt creeping back in. He was still uncertain about his role in both her life and the ranch's future. The weight of expectation settled heavy on him once more, a phantom pressing down on his chest. Would he be enough to help her flourish? In the silence that followed, both understood that this tenuous start was merely the beginning of a journey they would navigate together, each uncertain step regardless of the darkness that lingered in the corners of their lives. Silas woke before dawn, the familiar creaks and groans of his aging ranch echoing through the still air. He stepped outside, the chill biting at him, and as the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, he cast a glance at Ilara's small cabin. She'd been living with him for 2 weeks now, and despite the initial reluctance, he found himself drawn to her quiet strength. Silas prepared breakfast, a simple meal of eggs and toast, while thoughts of her drifted through his mind. He could almost hear the soft whispers of her laughter from the day before, filling the air with light. Ilara would often sit outside on the porch, her fingers brushing against the rough wood as she listened to the sounds of the ranch, the rustling of the wind through the vast fields, the distant lowing of cattle, and the harmonious chirping of morning birds. She had taken to sketching scenes from her imagination, though Silas could never fathom how she captured the world she could not see. Yet he marveled at the way she expressed herself through her art, each stroke of her pencil revealing an inner landscape that left him both impressed and curious. On a particularly crisp morning, Silas emerged from the barn, sweat on his brow from the labor of the day. As he turned towards the house, he spotted Ilara seated on the porch, her braids dancing lightly in the wind. She was deeply focused, her pencil gliding over the page, and for a moment he hesitated, observing her from a distance. There was a passion in her, an energy that shifted the atmosphere around her, and Silas felt an inexplicable longing to uncover her world, to understand her unspoken truths. "Can I see what you're working on?" he asked, his voice tentative as he stepped closer. Ilara paused, her fingers hovering above the page. She tilted her head slightly as if trying to gauge his interest through his tone. The moment stretched, a fragile thread tethering them together, before she nodded and turned the sketch towards him. His breath caught in his throat. She had captured him, a blend of shadow and light, each detail echoing the grooves of his weathered face. Silas felt an odd mix of pride and vulnerability wash over him. It's me." His voice cracked slightly. "You really see me." Ilara's smile was faint but filled with warmth, yet something flickered in her expression. Was it doubt or fear? He couldn't quite place it. "I feel you," she replied softly, and in that moment, Silas was both drawn in and pushed away. He wanted to dive deeper into her world, but the fear of what he might uncover held him back. Days turned into weeks, and the routine settled around them like the dust the ranch kicked up in the wind. Silas would toil through the day, tending to the livestock and repairing fences, while Ilara painted and sketched in her little oasis of sunlight. Yet, as the weeks passed, Silas noticed a tightness growing between them. The bond that had begun to form felt strained, as if unspoken words hung heavy in the air between them. He would catch Ilara looking at him with a mixture of reverence and something else, something painfully distant. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of crimson and gold, Silas confronted the tension head-on. "What is it, Ilara? You've been so quiet lately. Is it something I've done?" The question hung in the air, a dare to the silence that surrounded them. Ilara turned her head away, her hands frozen in her lap, and for a moment Silas was struck by the thought that maybe he was merely a shadow in her world. "I'm scared," she whispered, her voice barely breaking through the stillness. "What if you really see me?" The admission hit Silas like a torrent of cold water, awakening feelings he had tucked away. Ilara was blind, yet in the depths of her being, she could sense him in ways he never imagined. "I don't want to be a burden to you, Silas. I don't want to take more than I can give." Her vulnerability hung in the air, raw and exposed, and Silas felt the knot in his chest tighten. "Burden," he echoed, the word tasting foreign on his tongue. "You've done the opposite, Ilara. You've given me more than I could ever repay." Silas stepped closer, the distance between them closing, like the space that separated longing from fear. "You've opened my eyes to a world I didn't know existed." In that moment, as he stood before her, Silas realized that their struggles weren't just about her blindness or his reservations. They were about two souls navigating through the shadows together, both needing the light of understanding. Ilara sat cross-legged on the dusty porch of the small cabin that had become her sanctuary. Her fingers were stained with paint, the remnants of her last creation still clinging to her skin like whispered memories. She turned her face toward the sun, its warmth a soothing balm against her closed eyelids. Ilara breathed in deeply, filling her lungs with the earthy scent of hay and the sweet wild aroma of sagebrush that wafted through the open air. This ranch, once foreign and imposing, was beginning to feel like a home. Silas entered the cabin, his boots scraping against the wooden floorboards. He paused to watch Ilara, a hint of admiration curling his lips. Here was a girl who had endured more than he could imagine, and yet found a way to express her spirit through the vibrant strokes of her brush. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, unease creeping into his thoughts. He had bought Ilara, and although he had promised himself to treat her with kindness, the weight of that decision sometimes clawed at his conscience. "Ilara," he called out hesitantly. She turned her head toward his voice, sensing the shift in the air. "I wanted to ask if you needed anything from town." "I could," he faltered, unsure of how to finish that thought. His voice trailed off, leaving a heavy silence that draped over them. "I'm fine, Silas," Ilara replied, her tone blanketing the vulnerability that lingered just beneath the surface. She had grown accustomed to relying on herself, to navigating life in a world devoid of sight. But as he stood there, a silhouette against the sun, she wondered if he could see the chaos that spun within her, a tempest of gratitude, frustration, and hope. "The paints are all I need." Silas shifted his weight, guilt prickling at his conscience. "You know, sometimes it feels like I'm just your caretaker." The admission slipped from his lips before he could stop it, and he immediately regretted the tone of vulnerability that had crept in. "I didn't mean to make you feel like a burden." His words hung in the air, a delicate thread connecting them, yet they felt like a chasm widening. Ilara focused intently on the sound of his voice, clenching her hands tightly together. For a fleeting moment, she felt the sting of his words, as if they cut through the years spent in the shadows, the years of feeling less than, of being someone's charity rather than a companion. "I'm not a burden," she asserted, her voice steady but low. "I didn't ask to be taken in like a stray. I can take care of myself." She wished she could paint the passion of her rebuttal. She envisioned colors swirling on a canvas, blurring the edges of her insecurities. But the truth of her vulnerability remained unspoken, rattling within her ribcage. Silas's heart tightened as her words pierced through him. "That's not what I meant." He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking, allowing the warmth of his presence to wash over her. "I just thought maybe you'd want to share something with me. I thought I could help you find your way." His voice was earnest, filled with a longing to connect, to dissolve the invisible barriers that had formed between them. Ilara turned to him, a swell of emotions threatening to spill over. The brush of his concern felt foreign and yet familiar. Was it hope she felt? The walls she had built began to tremble, and she wrestled with a wave of vulnerability that threatened to engulf her. "Why do you care?" she whispered, the question hanging in the air like an uninvited guest. Silas took a breath, the weight of his own truth pressing against his chest. "Because, Ilara, I see you," he confessed. "Not just the girl who can't see, but the artist, the brave soul fighting through her own darkness. I've been there myself." He was surprised by the rawness of his admission, the way it laid bare a part of him he had hidden even from himself. "And I don't want you to feel like you're alone." In that moment, the air thickened between them, an unspoken understanding bridging their differences. Ilara felt a flicker of something deep within her, a trust slowly unfurling, tentative yet undeniable. Maybe, just maybe, she could let him see her in all her imperfect glory, as the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting a golden glow over a new beginning. Ilara sat on the splintered porch of the modest cabin, her fingers brushing the sun-warmed wood. It was a still afternoon, the kind that held its breath, waiting for the world to spill forth. Silas hustled about the corral, tending to the horses with a focused intensity, his broad shoulders rising and falling beneath the weight of the day. The quietness around them hummed, a melody only Ilara could hear, a rhythm of nature that played in her mind like a distant memory. She could sense him nearby, his presence a sturdy anchor in the swirling currents of her thoughts. With her sight lost to shadows, she relied on her other senses, the way Silas's footsteps crunched against the gravel, the scent of hay and earth mingling in the air. Ilara closed her eyes, imagining the ranch in vivid colors. She pictured Silas's nervous energy, his hands rough around the edges, but filled with a warmth she could nearly feel radiating from him. When he approached, she could hear the soft rustle of fabric, an indicator he was checking on her. She had taken to sketching with charcoal on scraps of paper she found in the cabin, each stroke an attempt to capture the world she had lost. Today, she had worked fervently, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and insecurity, pouring her feelings into those few lines. "Silas," she called, her voice steady, though her heart raced with the anticipation of sharing. "Yeah?" His voice was deeper now, tinged with curiosity. Ilara tilted her head slightly, searching for the cadence of his footsteps, letting the sound guide her. The warmth of his breath brushed against her ear as he drew nearer, and she felt a flutter, a connection blossoming between them that she had not anticipated. "What is it?" "I've created something," she replied, her fingers twitching with nervousness as she clutched her latest work against her chest. "But I wonder if you'd like to see it." The silence stretched, and for a moment Ilara feared she had put him off. The rustle of hay halted, and she imagined him tilting his head, his brow furrowed with contemplation. "Of course, I'd like to see it," he finally responded, his words slow and deliberate, as if he was savoring each sound. Ilara felt a smile tugging at the corners of her lips, a burst of warmth flooding through her veins. She held the paper out to him, the charcoal smudges still fresh, the depiction of him that had tumbled forth from her mind's eye. "Here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause, a moment where the world ceased to exist outside of them. He took the piece into his hands, and she imagined the way his fingers would delicately navigate the contours of her artwork. "It's me?" he asked, a hint of disbelief lacing his tone. Ilara leaned forward slightly, straining to catch his response in the fabric of his voice. "Your spirit," she clarified, the corners of her mouth lifting with pride. "How I feel when I think of you." The air between them shifted subtly, electric, as if a bridge were forming from her heart to his. There was a silence that pulsed with potential, a shared understanding that blossomed in the shadows of their pasts. She sensed the way he took a breath, held it, as if the fragile moment might shatter if disturbed. Then came a soft chuckle, a sound that wrapped around her like a warm blanket. "I never thought I would be captured in charcoal by someone like you," he said, a new light in his voice, something that suggested he saw her not just as the girl from the cabin, but as a kindred spirit. The connection they had unknowingly nurtured began to seep into the air, creating a fragile yet powerful bond between them, grounded in understanding and acceptance. Ilara dared to imagine the possibilities, what it would mean to paint the world anew together. As Silas studied her creation, she felt as if she were peeling back layers of herself, revealing the complexities that lay beneath. In that moment, something shifted in the heart of the ranch, a new chapter waiting to unfurl, one where she and Silas could exist side by side, each finding light in the other's shadow. Ilara sat in the dim light of the barn, the warm scent of hay wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. The soft sound of Silas's footsteps echoed through the wooden structure, but she focused on the brush in her hand, poised above the canvas. In her mind, she could see the strokes of color that would reflect the world around her, a world she couldn't see, but felt with every fiber of her being. Each movement was a whisper of yearning, her fingers trembling with the unspoken words that danced on the tip of her tongue. Silas paused in the doorway, observing her with an unwavering gaze. He was familiar with her routine. She would get lost in her art, losing herself in the textures and the vibrancy of the paints. Yet today, something was different. He could sense a storm brewing within her, an urge that seemed almost tangible. She had painted him so many times, capturing the lines of his face, the quiet strength in his posture, yet this time felt heavier, filled with the weight of emotions that threatened to break free. Inside her heart, Ilara was caught in turmoil. The desire to share her thoughts, to voice the feelings that fluttered through her like errant butterflies, twisted her insides. She had always communicated through art, a silent bargain with the world. But here, with Silas just a few meters away, the gulf between their understanding felt insurmountable. She wanted to be more than a shadow in his life, more than a girl who painted. She yearned to be heard, to speak of the dreams that haunted her in the stillness of night. With her brush poised above the canvas, she took a deep breath, the vibrant colors waiting for her to give them life. To say something, anything, felt like stepping off a cliff. She wanted to tell him of the beauty she felt in the world, the quiet solace that came with the dawn, how the sun's rays danced on the dew-kissed grass. But those words were trapped, locked away in a vault of fear. What if he didn't understand? What if she stumbled over the vowels and consonants, rendering her voice meaningless? Silas stepped closer, his presence a steady anchor that pulled her from her spiraling thoughts. He had always been patient, allowing her silence to speak for itself. Yet today there was a flicker of something. Was it hope? Ilara's heart raced as she dared to look towards him, her canvas momentarily forgotten. He stood there, the light catching the weary lines etched on his face, and she could feel the warmth radiating from him, a lighthouse in her fog. As she gazed up at him, a sudden rush of determination surged through her. Perhaps she could paint her words, not with colors, but with sounds. The reality of the moment pressed down on her, the intoxicating blend of fear and exhilaration coursing through her veins. She lowered her brush, letting it rest against the edge of the canvas, and took a hesitant step towards him, her heart pounding like a wild stallion. "Silas," she managed, her voice barely a whisper, yet it rang loud in the silence surrounding them. The syllables fell from her lips, breaking the dam of anxiety that had held her captive for so long. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized the power of that single word. It was a thread unraveling, leading her into the light. She stepped closer, her hands trembling, and she felt the weight of his gaze upon her, shifting from curiosity to something deeper. "Silas, she stammered, the words scrambling in her mind but bursting forth with undeniable urgency. The world around her faded as she poured out her heart, her voice growing steadier with each syllable. "I want to tell you about the colors I see in my mind, about the stories behind every brushstroke. I want to share my dreams." Silas's expression softened, the rough lines of his face easing into a warm smile, and in that moment, Ilara felt as if she had leapt into the air, defying gravity. The walls she had built around her crumbled, revealing a vulnerable side she had never dared to show. She stood before him, unguarded, and though the path ahead was still daunting, the ground beneath her feet felt firmer than it ever had before. The sun dipped languidly behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the ranch as Silas stood in the doorway of the barn, breathing in the warm, earthy scent of hay and wood. Ilara had been painting again, her brushstrokes filled with an energy that Silas had never seen in her before. He could feel the air crackle with her unspoken thoughts, a silent storm of emotion that had begun to take shape on the canvas just outside his view. He moved slowly, deliberately, drawn to her presence like a moth to a flame. As he stepped closer, he could hear the soft swish of her brush against the canvas, a whisper of color against the stark white. He leaned against the barn doorframe, watching her work with an intensity that surprised him. Ilara, the girl whom he had taken in and cared for, had transformed before his eyes. No longer just the blind girl sold by her drunk aunt, she had become a vibrant spirit, pouring her heart onto the canvas, filling the silence with a symphony of colors and emotions that spoke louder than any words could convey. The sun's last rays illuminated the barn in golden hues, and Silas marveled at the way Ilara seemed to dance within her own world, utterly unaware of the effect she had on him. Each stroke was a revelation, revealing pieces of herself he had never seen, her longing, her joy, her struggle. With each moment spent watching her, he felt his resolve soften, the walls he had built around his heart beginning to crumble. He had once believed that love was a luxury he could not afford, yet Ilara's presence challenged that notion daily. Ilara paused, a slight mistaking of her brush against the canvas breaking the spell between them. She turned her head slightly, as if sensing his gaze, and Silas's breath caught in his throat. "Silas," she finally said, her voice tremulous yet steady. The way she spoke his name was like the softest touch, igniting something deep within him. Even though he could not see her eyes, he felt the weight of her expression in her voice, a mixture of vulnerability and strength that pierced through his defenses. "I'm here," he managed, stepping forward, his heart racing. He saw her face tilt slightly, as if she were trying to catch his presence through the air, her trust illuminating the darkness that had shadowed his heart for so long. He took another step, closing the distance between them, and in that moment, he knew what he had to do. He would face the fears that had held him captive for years. "What are you painting?" he asked, allowing himself to lean into the moment. For a heartbeat, silence enveloped them thick and heavy as Ilara searched for the words. "I'm painting you," she finally replied, a quiet strength evident in her tone. "I see you, Silas, not just the rancher. I see everything you hide, every struggle you carry. I see the man who has taken me in, who has taught me kindness, who has opened his heart. You need to see that." The intensity behind her words struck Silas like a thunderclap, a call to arms that awakened feelings buried deep within him. His heart raced as he absorbed her declaration. The canvas, once a mere collection of colors, now bore an image woven with the fabric of their shared existence, a reflection of understanding that transcended the physical. He wanted to reach out, to tell her she had seen him, truly seen him, but the words stuck in his throat. In that moment, he felt both naked and profoundly alive, standing before the girl who had chipped away at his scars with her innocence and warmth. "I'm not," he started, but Ilara interrupted him. "Silas, you're more than what you think you are. You've shown me light in the darkness. You've given me hope. I want you to know that you, too, are worthy of love." Her voice was steady, a soothing balm on his frayed edges. He felt something shift inside him, the weight of his past pressing upon him, lifting ever so slightly. The cadence of her words echoed back to him, a promise of a future he had not dared to envision. In that moment, the world around them faded to a distant hum, the barn becoming a sacred space where fears dissipated and vulnerability thrived. Silas took a breath, feeling the truth of her declaration seep into him. "Ilara," he began, the name filled with a power that urged him forward. "I see you too." As their eyes met across the canvas, Silas understood that they were both searching for the same thing: acceptance, a connection stitched together by shared struggles and unyielding hope. And in that instant, as their hearts beat in unison, a new chapter in their intertwined lives began, bound by the strength of the unspoken words that had finally found their voice. The sun dipped low, a molten orb melting into the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet. Ilara stood in the field, her brush poised delicately against the canvas, capturing the silhouette of Silas. The world around them was a symphony of rustling leaves and distant bird calls, but here, in this moment, silence reigned, heavy and profound. Silas, watching her, felt the weight of unspoken gratitude settle in his chest. He took a step closer, the crackle of dried grass underfoot grounding him. Ilara turned her head slightly, her unseeing gaze fixed where she sensed him, a warmth blooming between them that transcended words. With a gentle hand, he reached out, placing his palm on the edge of her canvas, a silent acknowledgement of her artistry, her resilience. As she painted, strokes becoming vibrant echoes of their shared journey, the wind whispered through the tall grass, a soft embrace that enveloped them both. In that sacred space, time unraveled, and all that mattered was the connection forged through painted colors and quiet understanding. Together they stood, two souls intertwined, bound by unyielding trust, as the last light faded, surrendering to the night.